Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Having lost everything, the millionaire decided to spite his ex-wife by marrying a country girl. But as soon as he stepped over the threshold of her house, he froze at the sight before him. Santos was a countryman. His father worked as a driver at the local sawmill, while his mother managed a large farm, rabbits, cows with calves, pigs, chickens, geese, and a large garden, half planted with pumpkins for animal feed and Santos. As a child, he often dreamed of having a brother, but his mother was never able to conceive again. When Santos was 12, his mother, fetching water from the well, suddenly groaned, clutched at her heart, dropped the buckets, and slowly sank to the ground where she died before the ambulance arrived, while frightened neighbors milled around. Santos remembered that day well in every detail. There, entering the principal's office, was the polite school director who found him sitting at the third desk by the window. He beckoned Santos over and whispered in his ear, "Get ready, Santos, your father will meet you." Indeed, his father was standing near the school's porch, awkwardly fiddling with his dusty, wood-shaving-covered cap. Seeing his son, he smiled awkwardly and embraced him by the shoulders. "Son, our mom has passed away. She's gone." At first, Santos did not believe his father, shook his head, and was stubborn. Then tears sprang from his eyes with the realization this was no joke, his father was not lying. Santos broke free from his father's hands and ran. They found him late at night in a field behind the village, curled up and asleep. His face was swollen from tears. Thus, they were left alone, as their neighbor Senora Cibula often called them. But the elder Samaro firmly decided that his son must reach greater heights. Not for the father, but for the mother. To get educated, earn a degree, and settle in the city. Therefore, he pushed Santos hard in mathematics and saved his modest salary for his son's city life. But he was too caught up in chasing extra money, working nonstop, first at the sawmill, then at home on the farm. Santos, of course, was always there to help. But still, it was hard living without any rest. At 52, when Santos was in his 11th grade, his father began to complain about his health. Now his right side ached, now his left side stabbed. He gradually began to decline, growing more tired, eating less. Within a few months, he turned from a robust man into a bent old man with a dim gaze. And one day, while resting in the shade and breathing heavily after tossing hay, he said to his son, "It's all over for me, I can't go on." "Come on, Dad," Santos smiled, sitting down beside him and pulling off his sweaty t-shirt. "What are you saying? We'll live on, retirement is soon." "Ah." His father waved his hand. "I won't make it." His words turned out to be prophetic. Not long before the final exams, Santos found himself bedridden for long periods. First in the mornings, then throughout the day. In May, when Santos returned home on a sunny day after successfully completing an exam, his father was asleep. Deciding not to wake him, he patiently waited for him to wake up. And his father was already dead. The entire village attended the father's funeral. They dug the grave next to his wife's. The neighboring women, looking at Santos, wept both out of pity for the father and sympathy for the son. The 17-year-old boy was left an orphan with no grandparents, nor any other relatives from his father's or mother's side. Santos himself was also in shock, unable to believe what had happened, sitting by his parents' graveside or at home in complete silence, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Kind-hearted neighbors offered to help with the farm. They watered the garden in the evenings and fed the livestock in the morning. But Santos quickly recovered. He was raised to be a man. After thanking the neighbors for their help, he managed on his own. At the same time, he prepared for his upcoming exams, not wanting to let down either his father or mother. He decided that he would, by any means necessary, fulfill his father's wish. He would enroll, study, and find a career. By fall, he had passed his exams, and the farm was wound down. The cow was given to Senora Cibula, the calves were sold, and the poultry and rabbits were slaughtered for meat. They harvested potatoes, carrots, and beets, sharing them with the neighbors. At the end of August, Santos said goodbye to everyone, locked the door of his parents' house, gave the second key to Senora Cibilla, and promised to visit whenever he could. The money his father had saved was enough for travel, dormitory fees, and the first few months. The scholarship was modest, so he had to take a part-time job and transfer to a distance learning program. Santos was sleep-deprived, ate poorly, and increasingly saw his father's reflection in the mirror. His gaze had acquired a look of indifference, which frightened him. Only the memory of his father and mother kept him going. The owner of the restaurant where Santos worked often praised him at staff meetings for his quick thinking and inventiveness. He was one of those waiters who could sell customers the most expensive and best items without blinking an eye. "One day you'll be a good businessman," he winked at him. Santos had never thought about it. He had been studying at the Faculty of Management and Business for 4 years, but he still didn't quite understand what he would do when he graduated. He had neither the time nor the emotional energy to think about it. He decided to finish his studies first and then think about what to do with his life. He did not want to work part-time for long. Fate had other plans. When Santos was in his 5th year and already writing his thesis, on his only day off, the owner called. "Santos, help out, will you? Our Rollo got drunk somewhere again, replace him. You're a capable guy, there's no one else to ask. You'll get his pay for the whole day." Santos paused for a moment. Rollo was the manager. Santos had helped him solve various issues when he was incapacitated after evening indulgences and couldn't handle customer complaints in the morning. But to replace him completely, and for the whole day? "I'll be there soon," Santos said curtly. He needed the money right now. Enrique Calvo, the owner, appreciated Santos's responsiveness and diligence. Throughout the whole day after Santos, not a single unsatisfied customer reached him. The new administrator resolved all complaints quickly, and guests left him with a smile on their faces and a pleasant bonus in the form of a dessert or a glass of wine. In the evening, while calculating the profits, Enrique Calvo realized that it would be more beneficial to promote Santos rather than continue to endure the drunken antics of his distant relative Rollo. The next day, Santos was called into the office and congratulated on his promotion. He was surprised and frustrated at the same time. "Enrique Calvo, I have a degree, after all." "I understand." Calvo raised his hands in conciliation. "Start integrating slowly. First in the evenings when it's busy, then full days from 10 to 7. Does that work? I'll pay you in full regardless." Santos agreed. He attended classes and wrote his thesis before noon, and in the evening, he rushed to the Laguna restaurant to change into a tuxedo and interact with guests. Work went well, and for the first time in a long while, Santos got enough sleep. After graduating with distinction, he brought his diploma to Enrique Calvo. "Now I can work full-time." This marked the beginning of Santos Somero's career. He often recalled his first job with a smile, but preferred not to think too much about his former boss. The fact was that Enrique Calvo, who had initially almost replaced his father, soon revealed his unpleasant side. The first year at work went well for Santos. He devised new tricks in serving customers, which led glossy capital city magazines to call the restaurant a place you want to return to again and again. Santos didn't do anything particularly complicated. He gifted guests with their signature desserts and branded boxes, congratulated regular customers on their birthdays and other significant events, allowed visitors with dogs to sit with their pets in a designated area, and he even replaced the repetitive music with bird chirps and sounds of nature. This last idea, however, was not to Enrique Calvo's liking. "What are you thinking?" He laughed. "Next, you'll be wanting to bring in crowing roosters." "Santos, we are not some kind of hippies. Classical music is classic because it's timeless and stimulates the appetite. Bring it back. If you don't like it in the speakers, let the orchestra play." And the orchestra played. Soon, there was a discussion about a new menu. As an idea, Santos suggested adding simple dishes like gazpacho and empanadas to enhance the feeling of homeliness in the restaurant even more. Enrique Calvo laughed off this suggestion. During the presentation, Santos looked at the partners sitting around the table and laughed. Santos, the Roosters were better, I swear. You don't like something? Everything. We have veneers, you understand, French chairs, an orchestra. And you're planning to bake pies? Are you from the countryside? One of the partners unexpectedly asked, crossing his arms over his stomach. Santos was taken aback by such a question. Yes, so what? It shows. For country folks, comfort is found in pies, while for city dwellers, it's a pristine tablecloth and impeccable fish served elegantly, along with speedy service. I completely agree, nodded Enrique. We need quick dishes, but they must also be presentable. Shrimp or mussels and wine, suggested a partner. Yes, not bad. Santos, thank you, take a seat. Santos felt humiliated for the remainder of the meeting. He believed that his stellar education and experience guided him to the right decisions, yet his rural roots were piercing through his refined exterior. Santos often visited his village, several times a month. He checked on the house, his parents' graves, Senora Cibilla, who had just turned 70, and the garden. He didn't want to spend his only day off each week sitting in the city, in this alien concrete environment. Since Santos earned a decent salary, he was gradually able to dress better, buy expensive watches, get a driver's license, rent a place, and then secure his first mortgage. Sometimes, looking in the mirror after a shower, Santos couldn't believe that the muscular guy with a neat beard and haircut was him. Even more often, he felt a disconnect between his life and his inner state when he was stuck in traffic in his Lexus, or when he went to play golf with Enrique or his partners. They no longer reminded him of his origins, but Santos always remembered that he came from the village. The village called to him. It beckoned with the breadth of the fields, sprinkled with dew at dawn, the warmth of the sun-heated grass, the delicious smell of a heating bathhouse mixed with the evening dampness and coolness. Nothing in the city could replace the feeling of being in his native place, not even the white tablecloths. Once, during a game of golf, Enrique Calvo noticed Santos's pensive state. He teased, choosing a club for his shot. Missing your gazpacho and empanadas? Are you humiliating me again? Santos grimaced. Why? Why would that be humiliating? I'm from the countryside myself, shrugged Enrique Calvo. What's humiliating about that? It's not that, it's your tone. Well, here we go, sang Enrique. The tone is all wrong. Rollo started like that too. First, he didn't like my tone, then the restaurant, now life itself. And what's so bad about empanadas, can you explain? I can. Enrique Calvo measured up, swung, and hit the ball. Pies are commonplace. But shrimp in 1980s champagne? That's not something everyone has. You'll understand soon, exclusivity isn't in comfort, it's in status. Pies lack status. Although Santos understood where his boss was coming from, he couldn't agree. Guests often shared personal details with him while discussing dishes, and Santos knew, focusing on nostalgia had to work. If not, competitors would snatch up the idea, it needed to be implemented urgently. It was so precious. After all, city dwellers, to return to their childhood, to their small hometown, would keep coming back again and again. Santos had saved up some money and decided to take a risk. He found a suitable place, bought it, and began renovations. He purchased furniture, a sign, kitchen equipment, and dishes. Then he approached Enrique and announced his departure. Enrique was furious. I brought you up from nothing, and this is how you leave me? I will work as required, Santos tried to calm him. There's time until fall. Ungrateful beast. Enrique Calvo screamed. Worse than Rollo. Going to compete against me? Well, go ahead. Let's see how long your empanadas last. Santos was saddened by his departure from the old restaurant. This wasn't how he had imagined his exit. At first, Enrique's hysteria seemed strange to him, but soon he understood why. His ideas indeed worked. They were suppressed at Laguna to keep him in check, to put him in his place. Because his small family restaurant Old Cottage became hugely popular within the first weeks of opening. There was often not enough staff or dishes. But all this was more than compensated for by the full bookings, gatherings with bards and small bands, and the smell of homemade food, which drew in city dwellers like hungry cats. Gazpacho and empanadas baked in a wood-fired oven became a real hit. Santos found out that many city residents were from villages. They made up the bulk of his customers. The restaurant reminded them of their childhoods in their grandmother's or parents' home, the happiest and most carefree time of their lives, which, alas, could not be returned. Santos sometimes noticed that the atmosphere he created resembled his parents' home. Since opening his own restaurant, he traveled to the village much less frequently, only a few times a year, usually in the summer, to clean up his parents' graves. He couldn't visit more often, simply because there wasn't enough time. The lack of sleep, anxiety, and constant rush returned. But Santos liked it. He felt he had done something good. He had created a project from scratch that brought him good money and joy to those around him. Probably, this was the future his parents had once dreamed of for him. He was glad that he could be proud of who he had become, thanks to his and their hard work. Santos was now 26. Business was excellent. The car loan and mortgage were paid off, and he had a significant amount of money in the bank. He also had an investment portfolio. Santos dreamed of one day returning to his native village to renovate his parents' house and then retire to live out his days in peace. And he worked like the devil. Santos hadn't met Magdalene until she came to the restaurant with her friends for lunch. The first thing she said to Santos at the end of their meal was, "What a wonderful place, just like my home." She was 23. She had come to the city from the village and was not at all ashamed of her background, which Santos found very appealing. He couldn't stand those who looked down on the countryside, despite being from there himself. Magdalene became a frequent visitor to his establishment. She came sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, but never with a man. Santos assumed she was single and decided to get to know her better. He would see her off to her taxi, join her at her table, and she always welcomed this. They discussed childhood, youth, future plans, and problems. Magdalene worked as a fitness trainer, earned a good income, had a great figure, and dressed stylishly. After school, she moved to the city to avoid being a burden on her parents. Initially, she took odd jobs, but then got into fitness, started going to the gym, trained as a trainer, and now charged exorbitant fees for personal training. A month after meeting, Santos invited Magdalene on a date after work in the evening, and she agreed. 2 months later, they were living together in his apartment and soon got married. Magdalene organized everything. She chose an expensive dress, a diamond tiara, and rings, rented a country club, managed the restaurant, the menu, and the guest list. When Santos suddenly remembered acquaintances from his native village and suggested inviting them, Magdalene frowned. "They are nice, your neighbors and mine, but we're not that close to them. I want only close people at our wedding. Understand?" Santos nodded, then reflected. Unlike Magdalene, he had no parents or friends. He had some acquaintances in the city, but couldn't really call them close. They were more like business partners. So, it turned out that at the wedding there were close people to Magdalene and strangers to Santos. Magdalene's parents approved of their daughter's choice, and she introduced them to Santos 2 months after they met. One weekend, Santos and Magdalene went to the village. There, in a neat log house, lived Senor and Senora Cabeza, his future in-laws. It turned out that when Magdalene reminisced about the village and home, she was actually referring more to a cottage because her father was a retired diplomat and her mother primarily grew flowers on the plot. It became clear that they had less in common than Santos had hoped. However, the Cabeza family made a good impression on him. Senor Gustavo, taking him aside that day, expressed his wish for only the best for his daughter. The relationship with Magdalene deteriorated rapidly after the wedding. Before the wedding, she greeted Santos with dinner every evening, even if it was ordered from a restaurant. But after the wedding, she often disappeared at friends' places in the evenings. She would return late at night, just when it was time for Santos to get up. She quit her job, claiming she wanted to dedicate all her time to the family. But in the end, Santos only saw her in the morning for an hour while he got ready for work, and she slept. Her behavior began to worry him. When Santos asked Magdalene to spend more time at home, she would pout. "Well, here we go. You want to control my life? Expecting me to wait for you like a princess locked in a tower?" Magdalene retorted. "I just want you to greet me after work like you used to, so we can spend more time together," Santos pleaded, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching as Magdalene undressed. "Of course," she scoffed. "Or maybe you're the one who relaxed after the wedding and stopped making time for me. Maybe I started hanging out with my friends more to not feel so lonely. Because you disappear all day at work, you don't even call me. Didn't you notice I bought new curtains or rugs? Did that ever cross your mind?" Santos had nothing to say in response. He decided he needed to make amends. He took days off at the expense of sleep, tried to call Magdalene from his office buried in reports. In the evenings, they went shopping. Contrary to Santos's expectations, Magdalene didn't buy kitchenware or curtains, but clothes and cosmetics, and expensive, luxury ones at that. When her husband commented on the cost of the purchases and their quantity, Magdalene got offended. "Are you begrudging the money spent on me? I can easily go back to work and spend as much on myself as I used to. Then you can organize your own dinners after work, you miserable selfish man." Santos was lost again and found nothing to say. His wife's arguments seemed substantial. Marriage was a delicate matter, he had learned that much from his father. But this was just the beginning. His days turned into walking through a minefield. Magdalene would get upset if he called and distracted her from something important, or she would create a scene because Santos didn't call her as usual. He endured the increasing fights and scandals for a long time, but soon realized that if things continued this way, he wouldn't outlive his father. Lack of sleep turned into chronic insomnia. Lying awake at night next to Magdalene, who snored peacefully after a bath and shower, Santos couldn't sleep. His family life tormented him. He couldn't figure out who was to blame for their frequent arguments, him or her. A major scandal erupted soon after. They were supposed to go to Senor Gustavo's anniversary celebration out of town, but Santos refused. After submitting the annual report, he just wanted to get some sleep. He also didn't want to drive in such a tired state, worried that he might fall asleep at the wheel. Hearing his refusal to go, Magdalene threw her purse on the floor in the hallway, hands on her hips. "I can drive too. Did you think about that?" "I'm not in the condition to argue right now, Magdalene," Santos groaned, collapsing exhausted on the sofa. "I just want to sleep, only sleep, my head is splitting. You go, and I'll come tomorrow after I've rested. Your father will understand, I think. He was so looking forward to showing you his new garage. He can show it tomorrow. You don't respect me, you don't respect my father. What else?" Magdalene exploded, choking on tears. "And then you wonder why I don't want to have children." "Magdalene, I beg you," Santos began, but then heard the door slam shut. Magdalene left. Santos had neither the strength nor the desire to think about her words. He fell asleep. His sleep was restless, and he slept terribly. He woke up 8 hours later, completely shattered. He looked at the clock, 4 a.m. Outside, in the misty haze, the outlines of high-rises were visible. The city was asleep. The sun was rising on the horizon as a dim, light spot. It seemed the day would be as hot as the day before. Despite the morning freshness, heat was already starting to rise from the asphalt below. Santos took a headache pill, washed it down with a lot of water, as his mother had taught him, opened the window to let in some fresh air, took a shower, and then set off to visit the Cabeza family at their country house. He was met with a noticeably cold reception. "Ah, Santos, you've arrived?" Senora Cabeza opened the gate for him. "Why didn't you call? Didn't warn us that you wouldn't come to the anniversary and that you would visit today?" I thought Magdalene would have informed you. Magdalene, the mother-in-law, raised an eyebrow. She arrived yesterday close to midnight, all in tears, disheveled. She locked herself upstairs in a room and that's it. She says you're selfish. Santos smiled involuntarily. Turns out she's still such a child. Which one of you is more of a child is something to think about. Senora Cabeza shook her head. Gustavo was also upset. He was so looking forward to seeing you. You could have at least sent a card. Senora Cabeza, I really couldn't. My blood pressure spiked. I barely made it home. Santos showed a bag that clinked with bottles. I'll congratulate him today. Sherry and Cava's his favorites. What, do you think he's an alcoholic or something? Senora Cabeza frowned. Yes, and he shouldn't. His heart is acting up. Breakfast was joyless. Magdalene refused to come downstairs. Gustavo Cabeza silently frowned and ate his eggs. Carolina Cabeza sighed continuously and looked at her son-in-law with disdain through her glasses. Santos felt awkward. On one hand, he wanted to apologize. He felt guilty for his behavior and for ruining the celebration and for sending his unhappy and angry daughter back to her parents. On the other hand, it seemed to him that he was not at fault, yet they were trying to make him feel so. What to do? Admit guilt, ask for forgiveness? Or flip the table upside down, express his accumulated grievances to Magdalene, and leave? He didn't know, so he also remained silent and ate. After breakfast, he congratulated Senor Cabeza on his anniversary, handing him a box with expensive watches. The bag with alcohol was hidden by Senora Cabeza somewhere in the kitchen. Senor Cabeza thanked Santos for the gift, shook his hand, even tried on the watches. But this did not alleviate the oppressive atmosphere in the house, and Santos guessed why. Santos, Gustavo began as they walked through the garden together. You do realize that I'm angry with you? And it's not because of the stupid anniversary, damn it. Am I guilty before Magdalene? Santos ventured. Exactly. You know, I'm in my 60s now. I want grandchildren, not to watch you two bicker. I don't know what to do, Santos confessed, and shared his and Magdalene's problems with his father-in-law. Gustavo Cabeza listened attentively to his son-in-law and smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. Santos, I understand. You lost your parents early, and they didn't have the chance to teach you how to treat a wife. They really only need one thing, to be loved. Isn't it obvious that I love her? Santos smirked. I provide for her, try to spend more time with her. I treat her gently, like a child. That's exactly it, you see her as a child. As someone foolish and naive. You're trying to teach her about life. Believe me, Magdalene knows better than you what to do and when. Just stop thinking you can teach her anything. You can't. Santos returned to the city, distressed and humiliated. So, according to Magdalene's parents and Magdalene herself, he was making unreasonable demands? Since when did dedicating time to home and husband and not roaming around clubs at night become abnormal? He had never restricted Magdalene anywhere. Want to work? Work. Want to stay at home? Stay. Meet with friends, invite them over. Do whatever you want, but be present. Don't disappear for days on end. Was he really thinking like a tyrant who can't handle women? Or, perhaps, had Magdalene and her parents become slightly too audacious, living off his expenses? He decided to try and mend things with his wife and reconcile. He sent her a basket of flowers with a note saying "Forgive me," and called her. Then, a week later, he went to the Cabez family home and brought Magdalene back. The first day went perfectly. They were once again the closest of companions. Magdalene cooked red fish. Santos came home early from work and brought a bottle of wine. They discussed their argument and what they should avoid in the future. Then Magdalene went to take a shower. Santos thought she would go to bed, but no. Magdalene got dressed, approached Santos, and kissed him on the cheek. I'm going out with the girls. Go, he sighed, trying not to get angry. Will you be out until morning? Do you need a ride? Maybe, maybe not, Magdalene smiled. I want to be with you, Santos blurted out suddenly. The smile vanished from Magdalene's face. Why? To ruin my evening? I want to spend more time with you. Maybe I'll enjoy it. We could go clubbing together all night. No, Magdalene cut him off. You're acting like you want to control and educate me again. I'll manage on my own. And you need to sleep, you have work tomorrow. She gave Santos a dry kiss on the cheek and left. He was struck with a wild idea to follow her. Santos felt that his wife was cheating on him. He also felt like he was going insane. They lived together for another year. Magdalene, still not working, continued to spend money carelessly, disappeared at night, and returned home in the morning to sleep. Santos worked, increasingly often making his own dinners and eating alone. He tried to explain to Magdalene that the lifestyle she was leading was destroying not only their marriage, but also herself. After all, life can't just be about buying dresses and going clubbing. You need a profession, a business, goals. Magdalene dismissed his attempts to teach her about life and sometimes even threatened him. I might call my father. Let him talk some sense into you. Because you're trying to educate me again. Soon, Magdalene informed Santos that she wanted a divorce. He was shocked. He lived alone for a week after Magdalene packed her things and moved back to her rental apartment where she lived before getting married. During that week, he realized he was better off without Magdalene than with her. There was no trace left of their former affection and warmth. Why torture each other? He agreed to the divorce. Santos went to court with a calm heart, confident they would part amicably. But he was met with an unpleasant surprise in court. So, Senor Samero, you have no claims against your wife and are ready to dissolve the marriage, splitting the assets in half, leaving the apartment to your wife and keeping your share of the business. Do you, Senor Samero, agree to your husband's terms? No. Magdalene's eyes sparkled. I demand half of the business. Santos froze. He realized that the divorce would not go according to the script he had envisioned. He knew Magdalene could claim half of the restaurant. But truthfully, she had shown no interest in Santos's restaurant, so he had completely forgotten about it. I need half of the restaurant, all according to the law. This led to prolonged legal battles. Magdalene's lawyer pushed their agenda, while Santos's lawyer demanded that they agree to his terms. But Magdalene would not agree. After several months, she won half of the business from Santos. He was seething with injustice and anger when the decision was announced, but there was nothing he could do. Pleased with the outcome, Magdalene did not bother her ex-husband for several weeks. Then he learned the terrible news: Magdalene was planning to sell her share of the business. Santos called her, trying to find out to whom his ex-wife was trying to sell his brainchild for a pittance. She just laughed. I can't tell, it's a secret. You'll find out soon enough. Santos did find out. At one of the meetings, none other than Enrique Calvo appeared. He contemptuously surveyed the interior, the employees, Santos, and declared, "It's terrible. Such a tasteless place. It's going to cost a fortune to fix it up." Santos thought that hell was his last year living with Magdalene and the court battles, but he was wrong. The real hell began when he had to deal with his former boss and rival as a co-owner of the business. Enrique Calvo rejected all of Santos's proposals and, as a co-owner, gradually began changing the concept and menu, the staff, and suppliers. Visitors sadly, and sometimes angrily, watched the decline of Old Cottage. The dishes became tasteless, the interior dusty and worn, the staff rude, and the cultural program was supplemented with lowbrow songs. The clientele of the restaurant also changed. Instead of cultured individuals seeking a cozy atmosphere, the tables were increasingly filled with outright thugs attracted by the cheap menu, predominantly awful dishes, accessible waitresses, and the ability to smoke right at the table. The old patrons visited less frequently, and then the new ones dwindled too. By the end of the month, Santos was apathetically reconciling the accounts, realizing they were operating at a loss. Still, sometimes, he harbored hope that his former boss would stop destroying his business. That did not happen. At one point, Santos realized in horror that he had no money to pay suppliers and no funds for taxes. The restaurant needed to be sold. There were no takers to buy the failing business. One day, Enrique Calvo showed up in Santos's office with a smirk and offered to buy out Santos's share for a pittance, becoming the sole owner. Santos agreed. By then, there was no trace left of the reputation of his creation. Unable to pay off the bank loan he had taken earlier, Santos decided to sell his apartment. One September day, he loaded a small suitcase into his car and drove to the village. The only place where he felt he could recover from the damage inflicted by his competitor and ex-wife, both materially and psychologically. Santos's childhood home greeted him with boarded-up shutters and overgrowth up to his neck. It had long been neglected. The neighbor, Senora Cibula, had aged and stopped tending to her garden. Other neighbors gradually forgot both Santos and his father. Thus, the house slowly decayed and became overrun with cobwebs. It needed repairs. Nonetheless, it was still a place of strength, and strength was what Santos desperately needed now, as he had almost none left. Senora Cibula was delighted by the return of the younger Samaro. She often visited to check on him, bringing something tasty, pies, jams. They drank coffee in the old kitchen, which Santos had somewhat put in order. He washed the walls, floors, ceiling, windows, cleaned the table and chairs from mouse droppings, hung curtains brought by Senora Cibula, arranged dishes he had brought from the city in a lopsided cupboard, and changed the light bulb. Santos told his neighbor about his marriage and divorce. He cried bitterly, biting his fist, cursing himself. Senora Cibula smiled calmly, patted his shaggy head, and lamented. "Cry, dear, cry. Don't hold it in. Oh, that Magdalene. Oh, that Enrique Calvo. They hurt you, robbed you." Initially, Santos was embarrassed to be treated like a child. But eventually, he stopped minding. After all, Senora Cibula had known him since he was a child. After selling all his property, Santos didn't have much money left. He replaced some of the rotten floorboards, old windows, doors, and the shingles on the roof. There was no money left for furniture or appliances. Santos managed to repair what was there. He cleaned the sofa and replaced the legs on the chairs. Here in the village, he rediscovered his enjoyment of working with his hands. It was wonderful, waking up in the morning not to the call of an accountant, but to the crowing of a rooster. His sleep and appetite returned. A month later, in May, Santos decided to work on the garden. He first used his father's scythe to clear and burn all the weeds at the ravine by the gate. Then, over a week with a shovel, he plowed the soil, pruned the raspberry bushes, and made vegetable beds. He took some potatoes from Senora Cibula's cellar and also planted some in her small garden. In the pantry storerooms, he found seeds for tomatoes, peppers, and artichokes. At the end of the month, Santos sat contentedly on the porch of his childhood home in an old creaky chair, sipping juice and looking over his land. Some areas were already showing the first sprouts, and the bushes were in bloom. It was then that Senora Cibula brought up the topic of marriage. "You fixed everything, Santos, you've managed it all. And your heart has healed, it seems you could love someone again." "Senora Cibula, love? Me?" Santos laughed. "I'm still getting gray hairs from my last marriage, and you're talking about love. Life is bleak without love," the neighbor clacked her toothless gums. "Without love, it's empty. With love, even a scorched field blossoms, and right now, your soul is just like that field. We have girls here who could match your soul." Santos gave the old woman a sly look. "Senora Cibula, have you come to matchmake me with someone?" "I have," she replied without a hint of deceit. "There's a girl named Anna. Just the right kind of girl, but she hasn't managed to get married. All the decent guys are taken, only drunkards left. And a drunkard won't do for her, she's too good for that. Santos promised to meet Anna, but her name alone made him smile. Anna. Surely, she had no education and rarely left the village, only on holidays. Senora Sibylla said that Anna worked on a farm. So, a milkmaid. What would they talk about, a milkmaid and a former restaurateur? The day came when Anna was supposed to visit Senora Sibylla to bring her pension. She came by each month after work from the post office, where she collected the old lady's money by proxy. For her help, she was treated to juice or lunch. This time, Santos also stopped by for coffee. Seeing Anna, he thought she looked exactly as he had imagined. A voluptuous 25-year-old with healthy rosy cheeks and thick braids down to her waist. A true milkmaid. And there he was, hardly resembling a restaurateur anymore, in tracksuits, a t-shirt, with a beard, untrimmed for months, considerably sunburnt, and thinner from working in the garden. "This is my neighbor, Anna." Santos Somero, the old lady pointed to him with her watery, weak eyes. "Why are you standing there like you don't belong? Sit down, we'll have some coffee." On the table were already set churros, a small bowl of candies, and a large coffee pot. "Pleased to meet you." Anna reached across the table to shake his hand. "Anna. But I'm Anna to my friends, and Senora Ferreira to everyone else. Am I a friend or a stranger?" Santos shook her sturdy, calloused hand. "For you, I am Senora Ferreira," she replied firmly. The conversation didn't flow. Anna and Senora Sibylla excitedly discussed farm matters, the rising price of milk, the ruination of production, and the new owner. Santos couldn't contribute to the conversation and silently drank his coffee. Anna seemed to him either brusque or, at the very least, cold. He felt no desire to get to know her better, much less marry her. He stayed out of politeness for half an hour and then excused himself, citing chores. "Don't be offended, Santos," Anna said as he was leaving. "I didn't mean to offend you by calling you a stranger. Senora Ferreira, to you I'm Santos Somero." Santos winked at her. "No offense taken, thanks for the coffee." A week later, Santos went to the city. He needed to buy some things for the house. After 2 hours of wandering through the hardware store, he decided to grab a bite. He felt compelled to visit his old cottage. Santos knew it would hurt to return to his restaurant, but he decided to brave it. The first thing he noticed was the new sign. The restaurant had been renamed. The interior and menu matched the new name, as did the clientele. What had once been a popular spot for family outings had transformed into a dive where laborers drank beer after work, noisily discussing and frequently arguing. Yet, among them, a scruffy and unshaven Santos felt at home. He wouldn't have dared to enter a decent place looking as he did. He ordered albondigas, a salad, and coffee. Waiting for his order. Santos, he suddenly heard and shuddered. A chill ran down his spine. It was Magdalene's voice. She stood before him, dressed up and groomed, examining his beard with some schadenfreude. "Santos, is that you?" "Hardly recognize you," Magdalene smirked, pulling out a chair. "May I sit?" "You don't mind, do you?" "I do mind, but you've already sat down," Santos responded gruffly. "What do you want, Magdalene?" "Why are you so rude?" she grimaced. "I just want to know how you are. We're not strangers, after all." Santos thought of Anna and smiled involuntarily. Perhaps they were closer than she thought. At least, Anna hadn't taken his business from him. "My life's good, Magdalene." "Doesn't look like it." "You know what I thought when I saw you?" Magdalene pulled out a small mirror from her purse. "I remembered how you forbade me from going to clubs because you were afraid for me. I don't know what you were afraid of, but it turns out you're the one who has fallen, not me. I still go shopping and clubbing with my friend, spending money on myself. Who was wrong in the end?" Blood roared in Santos's temples. He reddened and clenched his fists. This vixen was mocking him. She had taken away his life's work, was luxuriating with money to which she had no rightful claim, and laughed at him. Santos didn't wait for his order. He left some bills on the table and stood up. As a parting shot, he told Magdalene, "I hope you're happy." Of course. Nobody's trying to teach me life lessons, she smirked maliciously. Losers don't teach me life lessons. Santos returned to the village. He spent 2 days at home, speaking to no one, not even the neighbor. He doused himself with cold water and busied himself with cleaning, anything to rid himself of his anger. On the 3rd day, his anger subsided, but was replaced by sadness. Senora Sibila sent Ana to check on Santos. In the evening after her shift, Ana stopped by Santos's place. He was chopping wood, shirtless. Santos, hello, she called from beyond the fence. How are you? Santos planted the axe into a gnarled stump and wiped the sweat from his brow. Hello, Senora Ferreira. I'm doing wonderfully. And you? Not so great, Ana laughed. I'm tired after work, but instead of going home, I came here. Senora Sibila is out of her mind with worry about you. Don't you think about the old lady at all? Santos walked over to the gate, opened it, and let Ana into the yard. She shyly glanced at the beads of sweat on his bare chest, blushed slightly, but entered. You probably think I'm imposing? Saw a man and clamped onto him, looking to get married? Santos was silent. So, I'm right. But just so you know, I don't want to get married, Santos, Ana shrugged. It's hard enough on my own, and with a husband it'd be twice as hard. Feed him, take care of him, no time left for myself. What do you do in your free time? Santos perked up. Me? I read, watch movies, sometimes I paint. Really? Interesting. What do you read? Mostly classics. Ana nimbly hopped onto the fence, sitting atop it, swinging her legs. Miguel de Cervantes, Federico Garcia. I like foreign works too, especially Ayn Rand. Santos's eyes widened. Wow. I never managed to get through her work, though they recommended her in my 4th year of university. You missed out, Ana smiled. You really missed out. Anita lived alone, she never knew her father. His surname was the only thing connecting her to him. Her mother struggled to raise her daughter and manage the household, working on the farm. From the age of 16, Ana started working alongside her mother, but 5 years ago, her mother passed away. Anita was a good student in school, excelling in all subjects except physical education and drafting. She loved reading, but couldn't attend college. Her mother fell ill with multiple hernias in her spine, and her knees failed due to arthritis. She could no longer work. The financial burden fell on Ana's shoulders. She sometimes worked double shifts to afford medication and trips to the city for clinical visits. Unfortunately, they couldn't cure her mother. She died from bone cancer at 56, leaving Ana an orphan. Now, in addition to farm work, she also managed the household, a goat, chickens, and a garden. Listening to Ana's life story, Santos involuntarily compared it with his own and marveled at how this young woman, despite being so much younger, possessed a strength of spirit far greater than his. Why do they call you Ana? He asked as she was about to leave. It seems so harsh. It does sound a bit like a cow's call, Ana laughed. But I'm not offended. I've always been called that at school, though my mother called me Anita. Anita, Santos repeated, feeling a twinge in his heart. Anita suits you better. May I call you that? Anita suddenly sniffled. Since my mom died, no one has called me that. I thought I'd never hear it again. You can call me that, of course. Thank you for listening. In their next meeting, Santos did most of the talking. Anita came to him after work, bringing pies from Senora Sibila. They drank coffee and, like in times past with the old lady, Santos talked about his marriage, divorce, and restaurant. But now he was more emotional and detailed. He was interested in hearing a woman's perspective from the outside, because deep down, Santos still blamed himself for everything that had happened. He told Anita about how close he and Magdalene were initially, how they could talk for hours about everything from work to childhood stories. How she excitedly talked about the fun she had in her parents' garden, burying a treasure of colored glass, setting up traps for birds. Santos recognized himself in her stories. How warmly Magdalene's parents had welcomed him, and he genuinely considered them his own parents in some way. He sought advice, helped around the house on weekends. The Cabez family's reaction to the divorce shocked Santos deeply. They sided with their daughter and refused even to listen to any explanations from their former son-in-law. For them, there was simply no more Santos Samaro. The division of the business, to which their daughter had no connection, also raised no questions from the Cabez family. According to his father-in-law, Senor Gustavo, everything was by the law, half the business to the wife. Anita listened to Santos with her mouth agape, sometimes forgetting about the half-eaten candy in her hand or the cup of cold coffee. She sympathized with him and deeply despised Magdalene and her parents. In Anita's view, Magdalene had behaved terribly in the marriage. While it's understandable to want independence from one's husband, to have one's own hobbies, and the ability to meet with friends, and even the desire not to work and manage a household, spending nights out at clubs with friends Santos had only seen once at their wedding, Anita considered disgraceful. She also thought it was unfair to accuse Santos of giving too little attention to his wife and being controlling. "I've always been critical of women who hover over their husbands like mothers," said Anita as Santos finished his story. "And I despise men who, like tyrants, demand their wives account for everything, where they've been, who they were with, how much they spent. But your case was different." Anita believed that Santos had tried until the very end to save the marriage, attempted to spend more time with Magdalene, and never reproached her for her wastefulness, laziness, or insolence, even though perhaps he should have. As for Magdalene, she didn't value their marriage at all. Yes, and her parents, however much Santos respected them, were also bad people, greedy and malicious. So, Anita concluded, Magdalene was obviously to blame for everything that happened. But Santos was also at fault for being too gentle and naive. "How did you manage to become a businessman with such a character?" Anita smiled. Santos was taken aback. "You're so wise, Anita." "Yes, I now see the whole situation from the outside. Indeed, I am a rare fool and an idiot." "It's because you need to read the right books," she laughed. Santos liked her laugh and smile, and the sincerity of his new acquaintance. Thus, they seamlessly transitioned to informal communication and stopped considering each other strangers. In the evenings, they often gathered at Senora Sibylla's, cooked dinner, and discussed what had grown in the city, the latest news. Anita began to recount the books she had read. Santos listened with interest, while Senora Sibylla would start yawning and waving them off. "Oh, I can't, I'm going to lie down. Clean up the churros when you're done eating." Santos never quite understood whether the neighbor was genuinely tired of their literary discussions or if she just wanted to give them space to grow closer. In any case, Santos soon realized he was in love. Not in the way he had been with Magdalene, where he was head over heels from just one glance at her, but no less intense, just differently. Anita was warm, real, sincere. There wasn't a hint of deceit in her. Conversations with her were calming, not aggravating old wounds as it had been with Magdalene. Santos decided to confess his feelings. To his surprise, Anita reciprocated. "I feel as at peace with you as I do at home. You are my home." They started living together. Anita moved into Santos's house, shut up her own home, and moved her goat and chickens to Santos's barn. She came twice a week to check on the garden, delegating the watering to a neighborhood boy for a small fee. Under her touch, Santos's home filled with coziness, and flowers appeared in the garden. She continued working as a milkmaid and arranged for Santos to work at the farm too. His duties included distributing feed and cleaning the barns. It was not the most pleasant or easy work, but it paid well. With his first paycheck, he bought a new bed and dishes for the house. With the second, he purchased kitchen appliances, a stove, and a kettle. With the third, he renovated the bathroom. 6 months later, he gave Anita a ring. He did everything properly, bought flowers, got down on one knee. Anita agreed to become his wife. They went to the city and had a modest wedding, without guests. It was February. They decided to have the wedding in May, to gather the whole village in the garden. Meanwhile, they lived like a family, going to work together and returning together. When Anita had a day off and Santos was on shift, she busied herself with household tasks, washing curtains, baking, and of course, reading, comfortably nestled in an armchair with her feet up. When Santos had a day off, all these duties fell on his shoulders, and he constantly tried to patch up the house. Within a year, it had transformed. It was brighter, more spacious, more alive. Santos liked this. His life increasingly resembled that of his childhood before his mother's death, filled with the aroma of fresh baking and laundered clothes. A dear friend nearby, constant physical labor, and a mind filled with only future plans, renovating the home and married life. Plans that brought joy, making every morning wake-up desirable. Anita also liked her new life. Finally, after so many years, she could relax and trust someone else. She could share some of the responsibility. Santos proved to be a wise husband. He didn't demand Anita to be a perfect housekeeper. He always noticed when she was tired or unwell. He took care of her tenderly during such times and was grateful for everything she did for him. The first time he tried her signature gazpacho, his eyes rolled back in pleasure. "Anita, this is delicious. I've never tasted anything like this in any restaurant. Will you share the recipe?" "Not on your life," laughed Anita. "That secret will go with me." He valued her companionship in his life, her support, and her ability to honestly discuss problems and find solutions. Once, his salary was delayed in May, and he was embarrassed. How to live? To exist on Anita's expense? It was shameful. Watching him struggle with using her bank card at the local village store, Anita laughed. "Santos, really? We're family. Why are you so embarrassed?" "Because I'm a man," grumbled Santos. "Not foresight. I spent everything on boards. Trusted too much, like a fool." "You're not a fool, and you have golden hands. Look," she pointed to their home, hidden behind the thick greenery of trees. "Look how beautiful it is. You gave it a second life." Santos paused, looked. The brown-painted facade was visible through the branches. New windows on the attic and first floor reflected the sunset. Thin smoke spiraled from the chimney. Chickens strutted importantly under the windows in the flower bed. A ginger neighbor's cat sat on the new wooden fence. Yes, the house indeed looked alive now. But he didn't feel any less guilty because of it. "Sorry," he hugged Anita by the shoulders and pulled her close. "I'll be more foresight from now on. And for feeding us, I'll organize a royal wedding for you." "Agreed?" Anita nodded. All through June, Santos prepared to fulfill his promise. He built an altar from willow branches in the yard, several tables, and benches. He arranged with a band that often played at his restaurant to come to the village for the day. He was very worried about how much the musicians would ask for such a remote gig. But they laughed, playfully snatching the phone from each other. "Santos Somero, how could we not? We'll play for the old time's sake. No need for money. It's such an occasion, congratulations. Yes, we'll provide the music, and you bring the spirits, or it's a no-go." He sold his watch, the only memento from his old life, and bought Anita a dress when he took her to the city under the pretense of just taking a stroll. She hesitated uncertainly at the entrance of the bridal shop, looking at the mannequins. "Santos, isn't it probably expensive? You wanted to save. You're about to give me half of your life. The dress surely costs less, Anita," Santos smiled. She chose a simple dress, no petticoats or lace, just fine chiffon and batiste, but with a long train. She excitedly tried on all the veil options, telling Santos from a pedestal in front of the mirror, smiling. "I've always dreamed of this. Are you sure it's not expensive? We won't have to survive on water for the rest of our lives, will we?" "No," laughed Santos, admiring her. The money he got from the pawnshop for his watch, he considered well spent. He sold the memory of his old life to start a new one beautifully. They invited the whole village and some of Santos's acquaintances, old partners who maintained good relations with him. Suppliers, waitstaff, a lawyer. They feasted thanks to suppliers who brought fine meat, fish, fruits, vegetables, cheese, and wine. It turned out to be an outdoor restaurant event. The wedding began with a ceremony near the altar Santos had made in the spring. The village priest from the little church, where they had gone to confess beforehand, pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration continued with a feast, congratulations, dancing, and the giving of gifts. When guests got up from their tables in the evening to watch the fireworks, Anita, standing next to Santos, whispered, "Thank you. It's just like a fairy tale. I'm so happy." Santos kissed her on the crown of her head, which smelled of wildflowers. "And I'm happy." The morning after cleaning up and seeing off the guests, Anita sat on the porch drinking juice. Santos began to clear out his old room, planning to turn it into a nursery in the future, and stumbled upon an album. He brought it to Anita to show her. She looked at the photographs and asked Santos about what was happening in them. He told stories from his past, laughing sometimes until his stomach ached. Then Anita remembered. "I have one just like that somewhere. I'll go get it." Her album didn't look as impressive. There were few photos, but their value wasn't diminished by their scarcity. One photograph particularly caught Santos's attention. It showed Anita's mother alongside a man who seemed very familiar to him. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing at the man in the photo. "My father. I don't know his last name, but his first name is Andreo. My mother never talked about him, but Senora Sibylla knows a lot from her. I'm not sure how much of it is true, though." According to Senora Sibylla, Anita's father was a city dweller, a newcomer. It was unknown what brought him to the village, but it was here that he met her mother. A year after this photo was taken, Anita was born. Andreo was a man of means, as Anita's mother often said. She therefore believed that her daughter's future would be secure. But she was mistaken. Andreo did not acknowledge paternity. He didn't marry Anita's mother, but just disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. Anita's mother chose not to demand anything or demean herself. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She mourned for several years, then shouldered the responsibility of raising her daughter alone. She decided to make sure Anita would stand on her own 2 feet no matter what. Anita's mother seldom mentioned her father, reluctantly and never without clenching her jaw in anger. Senora Sibylla did not know Anita's father's surname or full name. Anita had no desire to look for him. Why would I need him? For his money? He broke my mother's life, betrayed her. She never managed to love again, became tough, covered in armor. He betrayed me too, never once inquired about me. Apparently, he's not interested. So why would I need him, Santos? Santos shared his wife's anger and pain, but the mysterious Andreo lingered in his mind. He split wood and tried to remember where he had seen him. He hoed potatoes and thought about him. He watched Anita as she combed her long hair in front of the mirror and thought again. Then one evening, while they were watching a movie, cuddled up on the couch, he suddenly realized Andreo was that same business partner of Enrique Calvo who had once ridiculed his idea about empanadas. It's definitely him. Stunned by his discovery, Santos smiled, shook his head, but decided not to tell Anita just yet. Firstly, what if he was mistaken? Secondly, he wasn't sure if identifying her father was of any importance to Anita. She noticed a change in his mood but assumed it was a reaction to the movie. To confirm his suspicion, Santos needed to learn the partner's name and some facts about his biography. Even better, he needed to talk to him personally. And dealing with Enrique Calvo in this matter was unavoidable. Santos was infuriated by the necessity of asking for help from his former boss, who had taken his business and crushed it to dust. But he saw no other solution. One day, coming to the city to service his car, he stopped by the La Laguna. In the time since Santos had last worked there, the restaurant had severely declined. The leather chairs required new upholstery, burned by cigarettes in the most unexpected places. The tables were plastered with gum on the underside and marred by graffiti of indecent content on the top side, including insults directed at the restaurant. Judging by them, the quality of the food was also subpar. Santos ordered some pasta. The apologetic waiter informed him that the dish was no longer available and suggested choosing another. Santos opted for a potato tortilla, but that too was missing from the menu. "How is that possible?" laughed Santos. "If a dish is on the menu, how can it not be available? I understand one item might be missing, they didn't update the menu, but not everything in a row. What do you have then? Do you have ravioli?" "No," the waiter smiled apologetically. "We have French fries, chicken nuggets, and a fresh vegetable salad." "A kid's menu? And the main courses?" "For main dishes, we have tortilla," the waiter proudly informed. Santos shook his head. He ordered coffee with tortilla and waited. Things for Enrique Calvo clearly weren't going well. Santos felt a guilty pleasure from the misfortune of his former boss and competitor, a balm on the wound left by his treacherous treatment of La Laguna. He had turned a good place into a dive, and now he got his comeuppance. On the other hand, any establishment in decline saddened Santos. Raised by his father, he was taught not to associate a place with its owner. And if the owner was bad, the restaurant was still worth pity. It reminded him of a child, long neglected by careless parents without proper care. His father taught Santos, "Everything you touch is under your responsibility. Forgot to water the cow? You're to blame. Didn't manage to store the hay under the roof in time and it got soaked by rain? You're to blame. And you must be responsible for it." Santos wondered if Enrique Calvo felt guilty about the restaurant's poor performance. Or did he, as usual, blame everyone else? Or perhaps La Laguna had simply become a victim of old rivals, as Old Cottage had been? He didn't have to wait long for an answer. Soon Enrique Calvo saw Santos passing by. He looked surprised, hesitated, then decided to approach. He sat opposite Santos and greeted him. Santos returned the greeting grimly. The tortilla he had been waiting for nearly 20 minutes was dry and tasteless, and the coffee was bitter. "Well, Santos, how's life treating you?" "Good," Santos responded briefly, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "Much better than before." "And you?" "Well, what can I say?" puffed Enrique Calvo. Same old, same old. Both restaurants are running, bringing in profits." "Then why don't you change the chairs?" Santos smiled. "They're all holes, scary to sit on. And there's a problem with the menu. From all the main dishes, there's only tortilla, and even that stale." "People like it," shrugged Enrique Calvo. "Obviously, the high society doesn't come here. Those who are embarrassed to go to decent places feel like kings here. Well, it even works to our advantage. More revenue, less need to invest." "Terrible." Santos shook his head. "You're just young," smiled Enrique Calvo. "You know, if you were wiser, we could have been partners. You were a sharp, efficient guy. You could have been rolling in dough by now." Santos smiled. "Speaking of which, remember you had a partner who mocked my empanadas? Are you still upset about that?" "Santos, you're like a little kid, I swear." "What's his name?" persisted Santos. "Can you tell me now?" "Why not?" "Andreo Moreira, my old friend. Reliable as a Swiss watch." Santos, roughly understanding what friendship meant in Enrique Calvo's circles, clearly realized that Enrique's friend could easily deceive and abandon a pregnant woman. "Can you give me his contact?" he smiled. Enrique Calvo laughed. "Why? Thinking of getting back into the industry?" "Why not?" shrugged Santos. "I'll save up some money, buy back my restaurant from you." "That's unlikely. In such a prime location, with its reputation, I won't sell cheap. And Andreo Moreira, get in touch with him yourself. Take care." Santos's former boss stood up from the table and walked away to his office on the first floor with his characteristic rolling gait. As expected, nothing had changed over the years. Enrique was still afraid of Santos and what he could potentially take back. Leaving the restaurant, Santos suddenly thought of Magdalene. How had her fate turned out? A year ago, she was so self-assured, feeling superior in a humiliating way towards Santos. Magdalene was never good with money, probably had burned through it all. Had she returned to work? Found another fool willing to support her and tolerate her perpetual absence, blatant and exploitative use of him as a wallet? He shook his head, dismissing thoughts of his ex-wife. Her life no longer concerned Santos. Returning home, he told Anita everything he knew about her father. Unexpectedly for both her and himself, she burst into tears, burying her face in Santos's shoulder. Some part of her soul believed that her father was not a deceiver and was generally a good person. It was just life circumstances that forced him to leave her mother and not communicate with his daughter. Anita had never tried to understand what these circumstances could be. Because she understood, there aren't any. There's no reason to act like that towards people you genuinely love, except one death. The thought that her father had died gave her strength, however cruel it might seem. Because death completely justified his behavior. But no, he was alive. Alive and well. He owned shares in restaurant businesses, was successful, drove an expensive car, lived in the city and never once inquired about his daughter, the fate of the woman he deceived and abandoned. He never visited, never sent a card, never called, though he had every opportunity to do so. Anita was terribly hurt, the bitterness tore her up inside, but still, a glimmer of hope warmed her soul. Maybe he didn't know my mother was pregnant? Maybe he doesn't even know about me? Maybe, Santos tried to reassure her. We don't have to guess, we can just ask him directly. But you didn't get his number. But we got his name, Santos smiled. It wasn't hard to get Senor Moreira's number. The first supplier Santos called confirmed he knew him and gave Santos Andreo's number. Santos didn't call himself, instead, he handed Anita a piece of paper with her father's number written on it. He said, "This is your father. It's up to you whether to call him or not." Anita didn't call, she was afraid. At first, she couldn't figure out how to introduce herself. "Hello, I am your daughter?" Sounds silly, like some kind of scam. Introduce myself by my name? Mention my mother's surname? And what is she feeling more, anger at him for leaving them, or happiness that she found him, even if almost at 30? And what would her mother say? She would probably be furious if she knew Anita was planning to connect with the man who betrayed her. And if there is an afterlife, her mother is probably outraged and angry. Wouldn't Anita be betraying her memory by deciding to forgive her father? All these thoughts swirled in her head as she worked, came home, cooked dinner, or listened to Santos. She looked detached. Santos didn't scold his wife for being withdrawn. On the contrary, he was even pleased about the soon resolution of the tragedy in her family. They didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Anita told her husband, who had the day off, upon returning home, "I'll call today. Please pour me some water. I'm so nervous, my knees are shaking. I feel like I'll faint from fear." They entered the house. Santos poured her a glass of water and sat opposite her. Anita dialed the number and put it on speakerphone. After a few rings, a female voice answered. "Yes?" Santos froze. Anita, looking at him confusedly, asked, "Hello. Is this Senor Moreira's number?" "Yes, he left his phone at home." "Is it something urgent?" "Who are you?" Anita faltered. "We are calling to inform you of something important." Santos joined the conversation. "Hello, this is Santos Samero." "Samero," the woman replied. "Yes, my husband mentioned something about you, I remember you. Are you a restaurateur?" "Yes." "And how may I address you?" "Dona Moreira." "Dona Moreira," Santos began, "nice to meet you. Understand that sitting next to me is Anita, Andreo Moreira's daughter. Do you know anything about her?" Did he ever mention her to you? There was a silence, a daunting silence. Anita nervously bit her thumb, casting frightened glances at her husband. He offered her an encouraging smile, though he himself felt uneasy. A daughter? Finally asked Senora Moreira. Yes, a daughter. Are you sure? Yes, Santos replied. We have a photograph of your husband with Anita's mother. Unfortunately, she has passed away. She can't confirm their connection, but there are many witnesses to it. Silence hung in the air again, then a loud sigh came from the other end. My God. So, you didn't know? Of course, I didn't, Andreo's wife said bitterly, laughing. I want to meet you and this girl Anita. Where can I come to? I will come right now. Santos gave her their address. He doubted that Senora Moreira would travel that far and was very worried that she would tell her husband everything, and he would convince her it was all untrue. However, his fears were unfounded. Dona Moreira arrived that same day a few hours after their phone call. Anita, who had been sitting pensively on the porch, listened to the evening chirping of crickets and the songs of birds. Santos sat beside her, cleaning shoes. Suddenly, a car pulled up at their gate, parked next to Santos' car. A statuesque, youthful woman stepped out, dressed in an elegant blazer and jeans. Approaching the gate, she removed her glasses, squinted, and waved a greeting hand. Hello. You are Santos, have I arrived correctly? He walked up to meet her, wiping his hands on his shirt. Yes, hello, Dona Moreira? That's correct. Anita jumped up as if stung the moment she saw the woman near the gate. She was terrified. Now this woman would enter the yard and start scolding her, Anita, for trying to disrupt the life of a happy married couple by reminding them of her existence. Or worse, that she was a fraudster and would demand money for silence. But Dona Moreira turned out not to be a shrew but rather a pleasant woman in her 50s. Her appearance showed that she did not flaunt her wealth, she dressed modestly and tastefully, and behaved likewise. Approaching Anita, she extended her hand in greeting. Hello, are you Anita? Yes, Anita replied nervously, swallowing hard. Good evening. Should I offer you some coffee? I wouldn't refuse, smiled Senora Moreira, shaking her hand warmly. It's so nice here. So peaceful and fresh air. I'll get some churros to go with the coffee, smiled Santos, opening the door to the house. They sat at a modestly set table, accompanied by the sounds of birds from the wide-open window, sipping coffee and getting to know each other. Anita shared about her mother, her childhood, and showed the photograph. Santos remained quiet, occasionally squeezing his wife's hand under the table. Senora Moreira listened intently, and upon seeing the photo, clutched her heart and exhaled. That's him. That's definitely him. After Anita's tale, she fell silent for a while, regaining her composure and sipping her coffee. She stared at the photograph with diminishing agitation each time. Then, she began to tell her own story. Senora Moreira met Andreo Moreira at university. He came from an ordinary family, his father was a welder, and his mother a salesperson. This was not the case for Dona. Her father owned 3 restaurants. Her mother didn't work, focusing on the home and her daughter. Dona grew up accustomed to a wealthy lifestyle, attended by a personal driver to school and university. She liked Andreo because he treated her like he treated everyone else, without false flattery or attempts to impress. This was rare. Usually, both boys and girls would fawn over Dona, not because they liked her, but because her father was wealthy. The first boy to whom she reciprocated love soon revealed he had befriended her only for her father's money. If she didn't arrange a meeting for them, he would no longer pretend to be in love with her. Naturally, they broke up, and Dona became more cautious in choosing her circle. Andreo didn't try to impress her. Sometimes he acted outright silly, snatching a sandwich from Dona while she was eating. However, he knew how to court her. He gifted flowers from the university gardens and huge bouquets of cherries in the spring. He took her to rooftops, arranging picnics with churros from the cafeteria. Dona's father was initially wary of her suitor, no notable name or money. But the dean of the faculty where Andrea studied praised him as diligent and talented. After graduation, Dona's father offered him a position. Initially, Andrea worked as an ordinary manager, then as the chief and later as an administrator. Soon he became the deputy director. During this time, Dona didn't work. She decided that management wasn't for her and enrolled in an arts faculty, which slightly angered her father. She continued to date Andrea, and they were moving towards marriage. Initially planning to transfer the business to his daughter, her father realized she had no intentions of taking over. Instead, her boyfriend seemed a suitable candidate for the role, making Senor Moreira the first candidate for the majority shareholder. Dona's father didn't know then that all of Andrea's academic and professional successes were linked to his almost genius ability to lie, manipulate, and flatter. This was only revealed much later, when the father had retired and Andrea took over management. However, the old man wasn't naive and had arranged a contract stipulating that in the event of a divorce, all assets would go to his daughter, and she owned the controlling share of the stocks. Essentially, Andrea was working for Dona and her father but could lose everything he had at any moment, hence the importance of maintaining the image of a good family man and the perfect husband. He was busy. The proposal, the wedding, children, it all went like clockwork. But as the children grew, Andrea began to stay late at work and frequently traveled on business trips. Initially, Dona was calm about her husband's busyness, their business was flourishing, and his involvement in the restaurants was essential. Finding new investments, streamlining processes. Dona herself had opened an art studio at that time and was also rarely at home. But when the studio began operating smoothly, she started to notice that her husband had changed. He was less attentive to her and the kids and seemed distracted. It was around the time he broke up with your mother, according to your stories, she addressed Anita. I don't understand, Anita sighed. Why did he need to start another relationship? He had everything. That's probably why, responded Senora Moreira. He had everything, and it became boring. He wanted adventure. When Dona tried to find out what had been preoccupying her husband for months, he suddenly changed, again becoming attentive to his wife and children. He reverted to his old self. From that moment until now, Andrea had repeatedly entered such phases of introspection. Avoiding interaction with his wife, he seemed to forget even her existence. It's scary to think how many more women he could have deceived during that time, how many children he could have fathered elsewhere. Dona Moreira's eyes filled with tears. She asked for something strong to drink, liqueur, brandy. Santos fetched a glass from the cabinet and poured some liqueur. She drank it, grimacing as she ate a chao. To truth and justice, my friends. She began to gather her things to go home, and Santos offered to drive her. On the way, he shared the circumstances under which he met Andrea. Senora Moreira was shocked by her husband's words, which revealed a hatred for rural life. Understandably, it reminded him of a mistake that could emerge at any moment and tarnish his impeccable reputation, stripping him of all his benefits. Dona decided she would file for divorce. Living with a cheater was not an option for her. She shared with Santos some interesting details about the fate of his restaurant. Right after speaking with him, Enrique Calvo contacted Andrea and proposed to buy Old Cottage. He agreed. Clearly, the former owner acted in his own interests and out of fear that Santos might decide to reclaim the restaurant. Negotiating with Andrea on investments and becoming a serious competitor again was something Enrique Calvo could not allow. He decided that selling the restaurant would be a lesser loss. He also sold the now declining Laguna, moved somewhere near the sea in the countryside, bought a house, and decided to focus on vineyards and health, which didn't please his young wife. It seems they will soon divorce. They said goodbye like old friends. Dona Moreira stood at the gate of her cottage for a long time, waving to Senor Samero as he drove away. At home, he had to spend a long time comforting Anita, who was hysterical and crying. All her hopes and dreams about her father were shattered. He was a terrible person. His wife confirmed it. She sobbed quietly into her pillow all night, so by morning her face was severely swollen from tears. But in the afternoon, having taken time off work, they visited the graves of their parents, Anita's mother's first, then Santos' parents. They brought fresh flowers, talked to them heart to heart, asking for their intercession and seeking forgiveness. And Anita moved on. That evening, she was laughing heartily at the jokes told by Senora Sibylla, who came to find out what interesting events were happening at the neighbors. Mysterious guests, tears. Naturally, the Samero family told her everything, well aware that by tomorrow the entire village would know about Andreo. Serves him right. Returning from work the next day, they found a familiar car parked at their house. Inside, Dona Moreira was asleep in the driver's seat. Santos tapped on the window. She woke up, reluctantly opened her eyes, and squinted. "Oh, it's you? I've been waiting. Why didn't you go to the neighbor's house, Senora Sibylla? There she is, sitting on the bench, waving. She's probably been watching you for hours." "Yes, it felt a bit awkward," shrugged Dona. "I have news about the restaurant and everything. Do you have a moment?" Senor and Senora Cabez invited Dona for a simple dinner, stewed potatoes with beef and a fresh vegetable salad. Senora Moreira offered to help. She rolled up her sleeves and chopped vegetables for the salad while Anita cooked and Santos peeled potatoes. She also shared her news. She had spoken to Andreo that same evening. She told him everything she thought of him and demanded a divorce. She had also spoken to her father. He was furious as a boar and decided to take steps to remove Andreo from the business soon. He contacted a lawyer for this. Andreo initially resisted, denying any wrongdoing. He claimed that Santos had made up the story of infidelity and an illegitimate daughter to get revenge on him for the restaurant and a long-held grudge. Dona Moreira was not fooled. She showed a photo taken on her phone of Andreo with Anita's mother. That's when he started to falter. He began to apologize, swearing that he had always loved only Dona and no one else. She ordered him to pack his things and leave. Which he did, tail tucked. "Strange," said Dona. "After I threw him out, I thought I would be inconsolably crying from the hurt. But on the contrary, I felt so relieved, as if I had gotten rid of garbage." Anita snorted. Senora Moreira looked seriously at Santos. "I think I'll return the restaurant to you, Santos." Santos, bewildered, stared at her. "What?" "I'll give you back your old cottage. My father says it has potential. He used to follow your progress, praised you. And he was very upset when you sold your business. But Laguna has no chance, it's only fit for demolition and the land for lease. Why don't you manage it yourself?" Santos persisted. "Me?" Dona laughed. "I've never liked that. I prefer this." She pointed to the salad. "I like chopping salads. All that business wrangling is not for me." "Not at all. If you really do return the restaurant to me," Santos said, hardly believing his joy, "I'll be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Seriously, no joking. It's my baby. My beloved baby. Just make sure you don't neglect your own kids for this beloved baby, like some do." Dona warned, wagging her finger. They dined, discussing future plans. Santos would need to return to the city if he planned to manage the restaurant. But something in him desperately resisted this. He didn't want his old life back, the apartment, the constant hustle, the money, the success. In his parents' home with Anita, Santos was happier than ever before. And he told Dona this honestly, without reservations. "If you give it back to me, I'll hire a manager and step back. I think I've outgrown it." "Whatever you like," Dona waved her hand dismissively. "Just don't make me manage it." Senora Moreira indeed kept her promise. A month later, he was once again the CEO. He recruited one of his old colleagues as the manager. He traveled to the city once a month to check how things were going and kept a close eye on the paperwork. But that was it. He couldn't immerse himself fully in the restaurant business. Anita was expecting a child. They quit their jobs at the farm, took up beekeeping, and produced honey. Watching his wife stroll through the garden with an apple in hand, Santos smiled and thought about how all the misfortunes were worth it to end up here, in his parents' home.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.